The myth of oneness, why the Buddha taught us to stand alone. One of the ironies of Buddhism coming to the West is that sometimes you hear the Buddha described as extolling interconnectedness and celebrating the oneness of all being, even though, as he actually pointed out, the extent to which we're interconnected is very unstable, and because it's unstable, it's a cause for suffering. As for oneness, he said there are levels of concentration in which you can get the mind into a state of oneness, but it's fabricated and it still contains some suffering. The way to insight, he said, is not to see things as one, but to see them as separate. Because only when you see them as separate can you get an objective perspective on them, to see what they're actually doing. Otherwise, the mind tends to go into the worlds of its thoughts. When you're inside them, you can't see the process by which they're created. So as we meditate, we're actually trying to gain a sense of the mind as something separate from its thoughts, from its perceptions, from all sensory contact, because it's only when it's separate that it's really secure. Now, this would be selfish if finding happiness for ourselves meant taking things away from other people or pushing them out of a space that we wanted. But actually, we're learning how to inhabit a space we already have, that already is ours, and that nobody else can get into. We need to do this because, given the instability of the world, if our happiness depends on things outside, if our goodness depends on things outside, it's very unstable, very unreliable. So we're trying to find a foundation for our goodness, not only our happiness, but also our goodness, right here inside. And that has to be separate, something that doesn't go up and down with the ups and downs of the world. Because you think about interconnectedness. What are we interconnected to? There are a lot of really stupid people out there making stupid decisions. They have an impact on us, and there's no way we can stop them. If our happiness depends on things that are going to be affected by their decisions, we're setting ourselves up for suffering. If our goodness depends on things being a certain way, in other words, I'll be good to you if you're good to me, that kind of goodness is on shaky foundations. So for the sake of your happiness, for the sake of your goodness, you've got to find this separate spot inside. It's composed both of concentration and discernment. The concentration is what gives you that sense of well-being. Simply being here right now, breathing in, breathing out, focused in the body, gaining a sense of the different energies flowing around, and seeing what you can do with them. Learning to take an interest in this dimension of your awareness, because it has a lot of potential. The way you breathe doesn't have to depend on the moods of the people around you. It doesn't even have to depend on your own moods. It can provide you with a way of getting out of unskillful moods. When you're angry and you notice that you're breathing in a way that aggravates the anger, you can stop and breathe in another way that gives the mind a peaceful place to step outside of the anger, step back from the anger to see what's causing it, where it's coming from, what appeal it has to you, and to what extent the anger is justified and to what extent it's not. That puts you in a position where you can actually look at what would be an effective way of dealing with the situation. If there are things that have to be changed, what would be the best way to change them? If you try to make this decision while you're in the anger, it's as if you have blinders. There's a lot that you can't see, and the irritation makes you impatient to come up with some answer right away, and the blinders give you a very narrow idea of what your alternatives are. Whereas if you can breathe in a way that's soothing, you can step back and take a larger, more patient view. You begin to realize that some things can be changed right now and other things are going to take time. And that if you really want to be effective and not just simply act on your moods, you'll have to wait until there's a proper opening. So you've got the breath here as your tool or as your foundation, giving you an independent place, independent source of happiness, well-being, that allows you to step outside of the unskillful things going on in your mind. It's when you can step outside of your mind this way. That's when you can step outside of the affairs of the world as well. But in addition to having this place, you have to see the value of stepping outside into this place. There are a lot of voices in the mind that say, "This is selfish, this is unfeeling. I'm not getting what I want out of the world outside." They can pull you in all sorts of directions, those voices. This is where discernment comes in, reminding you, what's really valuable inside? It's the survival of your goodness. You might say that as a Dhamma practitioner, you're a Dhamma Survivalist, stocking up on goodness inside, because that's something that can't be taken away. Regular survivalists have stocks of food, weapons, whatnot, not realizing that by having lots of food stocked away, if they're not generous with it when bad times come, then it's going to be something that will attract the attention of the neighbors, and not in a friendly way. So there's a danger even with having a stockpile of food. But there's no danger in having a stockpile of goodwill, a stockpile of compassion, a stockpile of virtue, concentration, and discernment. And those are the things you really need for the survival of the mind. That's where insight comes in, reminding you that you're not your body. You're not limited to this life. When this life ends, that's not the end of everything. So you have to ask yourself, what do I want to take along when I go? What will be good for me to take along? The good actions you do create good habits in the mind. Those good habits in the mind are things you carry with you. There's an image in the Dhammapada. The good that you've done will be like relatives waiting for you on the other side, glad to see you've come home. So keep that perspective in mind. Genuine survival means survival of your good qualities. When you have this combination of concentration as a sense of well-being that you can build on, and the discernment that senses the value of your good qualities, then your goodness really is independent, because it's got a separate foundation, a foundation that all those interconnected things can't touch. Only then is it safe, and only then are you safe to be around. As long as your goodness depends on things being a certain way, and then all of the sudden they're not that way, you can't be trusted. So even though you're doing this primarily for yourself, other people are going to benefit too. But you've got to work on developing this foundation, especially as you go back into the world of daily life. You'll find that this person pulls at you, that person pulls at you. All the different voices that are out there are going to pull you in. You've got to maintain this sense of being a little bit separate and be okay with that sense of being separate, realizing that that's where genuine security lies. We'd like to think that our relationships with other people will give us security, but you look at yourself. You're a very changeable person. As the Buddha said, there's nothing as quick to change as the mind, and it can change into all sorts of things. That applies to your mind, and to everybody else's minds too. They're just as changeable as you are. When you're in relationship, the changes don't get added, they get multiplied. So ultimate security is not in relationships. It's in having this separate place where you're harming no one. You're not harming yourself. You're not harming the people around you. You're not taking anything away from them. And you're developing a good stockpile of goodness that will radiate out from this separate foundation. So it's not as if you're running off and forgetting about the whole rest of the world. You are keeping them in mind. You're being responsible about how you look for your happiness. And there are so few people in the world who are responsible in that way. You realize that your search for happiness also entails a search for goodness, and as you're stockpiling both of them inside the mind, the things whose survival is worthwhile will survive, and they'll radiate a happiness and a goodness around them. The noble truths come first. We meditate because there's stress in our lives. The word stress here translates the Pali term, dukkha, which can mean anything from very subtle levels of stress all the way to very deep suffering. So whether we feel a lot of suffering in our lives or just a little bit of stress, however you translate the term, that's the problem that makes us want to come and meditate, to straighten out things inside. As the Buddha said, the reason we suffer is not because of uncomfortable or unpleasant things outside, sights, sounds, smells, tastes, tactile sensations. It's because of what we bring to these things from the inside. That's why we can suffer even from pleasant things. We suffer, we feel stress, because we cling. In fact, the clinging is the suffering. The word clinging, upadana, can also mean feeding. We feed on things. And here the word feeding, of course, means not just physical feeding, but also mental and emotional feeding. To be in a position where you have to feed is a very unstable position. You always have to worry about your source of food. That's why clinging, feeding, is suffering in and of itself. The mind has a sense of lack. Because of the lack, it wants to fill it up. You fill it up a little bit, and then it grows empty again. Our intestinal system, for instance, is not a sack. It's a tube. Whatever comes in, goes out. And the same with the mind's intestinal system. Things come in and give us a little bit of pleasure, and then the pleasure's gone. We want something new, something new, something new all the time. So it's a bad position to be in, having to feed. Because we identify ourselves as a being of one kind or another. That being has to feed. And then the feeding, of course, creates our sense of who we are, the way we feed, what we feed on. It's a vicious cycle. We meditate to get out of this. We're going to work directly on our minds, because the problem is in the mind. It's not out there. So focus on what your mind is doing. See if you can bring the mind to a state of stillness, so that you can have a sense of satisfaction being here. One of the reasons we feel so hungry for everything and so overwhelmed by all the choices out there is that we have this limitless sense of dissatisfaction inside. As the Buddha said, even if it rained gold coins, it wouldn't satisfy our desires for sensuality, and that covers just one kind of desire. There are lots of other desires we have, lots of other hungers we have. So try to get a sense of satisfaction in being right here. All of what we're doing here falls under the Four Noble Truths. We see that there's suffering and that its cause is in the mind. And the solution has to lie in the mind as well. It's always important to remember that the Four Noble Truths form the framework for right view. In other words, the right understanding about what we're doing. This is a point that a lot of people miss. For most people, the three characteristics are right view. That's the framework. And then the Four Noble Truths get interpreted inside that framework. In other words, they say that we suffer because we don't realize that things are inconstant or impermanent, or because we don't realize that there's no self, which is one of the interpretations of anatta. If we'd only learn the truth of these things, then we wouldn't suffer anymore. We wouldn't have any unrealistic expectations, and we'd be content to just accept the way things are. That's what they say, but that wouldn't satisfy the mind's hungers. The mind is hungry. If if you could let go of your clinging and craving simply by seeing that things are inconstant, stressful, and not self, it would be like saying that because food is inconstant, stressful, and not self, and your stomach is inconstant, stressful, and not self, you're going to content yourself with not eating anymore. If you actually tried that, you'd starve. Or before you starve to death, you'd probably say, enough of that, and go back to eating again. That's the way the mind works. No matter how much you tell yourself that these things out there are not satisfactory, you say, well, that's all I've got. And sometimes that's how Buddhist wisdom is interpreted. A willingness to accept that, well, this is all we've got, so let's satisfy ourselves with what we've got. But the Buddha realized that the hungers of the mind and the damage they cause run a lot deeper than that. So instead of placing the 3 characteristics first, he put the 4 noble truths first, and then the 3 characteristics, which are actually not really characteristics, he called them perceptions, find their role within the framework of the 4 noble truths and the duties appropriate to each. You've got to comprehend suffering. You've got to abandon its cause. You've got to realize the cessation of suffering. And then you've got to develop the path to its cessation. These are duties we have to do. Duties not in the sense of being imposed on us from outside, but duties that are simply built into the way things are, the way suffering works, and the way its end is going to work. If you want to put an end to suffering, this is what you've got to do. If you don't want to put an end to suffering, you're free to go anywhere and do anything you like. But suffering is still eating away at you. So when you've had enough of it, there's no other way to solve the problem aside from following these duties. The first 3 duties revolve around dispassion. In other words, to comprehend suffering is to see exactly what is the clinging that constitutes the suffering. And why do we like that clinging? We're feeding. We feel that we get our satisfaction out of feeding. But the Buddha wants you to see that there's suffering inherent in the feeding, and to really comprehend that suffering to the point where you feel dispassion for the whole process. Then you look for why you're clinging. It's because you're thirsty. You crave. That's what you've got to abandon, which, again, you do by developing dispassion for the craving. That's what brings about the cessation of suffering. The dispassion itself is what puts an end to suffering. And how are you going to bring that about? Through developing the path. The path does this by giving you an alternative source of food. The pleasure, the rapture, the sense of fullness, the refreshment that can come from getting the mind into concentration. You want to be able to tap into this refreshment because it's going to be your food on the path. And this is the one duty that doesn't immediately have to do with dispassion. In fact, you first got to have some passion for your concentration. You want dispassion for the craving. You want dispassion for the objects that you cling to. That dispassion is the 3rd noble truth. But to see these things so that you can develop dispassion in those ways means that you first got to have passion for the path. This is one case where you're not going to just say, my concentration is inconstant, stressful, not self. I'll let it go. You're actually fighting against those 3 perceptions. You want to make the mind as constant and as easeful and as much in your control as you can. And at this stage of the path, you apply those 3 perceptions to other things. Anything that would pull you away from the practice of virtue, the practice of concentration, or the practice of discernment. You see those distractions as inconstant, stressful, not self. These perceptions are there to develop a sense of dispassion for them. It's only when the path has really completed its work, in other words, it's fully developed, that you then let that go too. Then you apply the perceptions to the concentration itself. When you can let go of the concentration, along with the other factors of the path, You go beyond them to what the Buddha calls the property of the deathless. And if you have passion for that, you don't get fully awakened. But the fact that you've touched it means that you're awakened to some extent. This is where it's important to realize that the three characteristics, or the three perceptions, don't cover everything. In other words, this deathless is not inconstant and it's not stressful. But still, the Buddha says you've got to let go of it. That's why he says Sabbe Dhamma Anatta, not just Sabba Sankhara Anatta, not just all fabrications, but all Dhammas, all phenomena, fabricated or not, are not self. That's the perception you apply to that experience. That's when you're totally free. You can develop dispassion for that too. That may seem like a subtle issue. Which comes first, the Four Noble Truths or the three perceptions? It may sound like it's applicable only at the very end of the path, but it's important to keep this perspective in mind all along the way, for two reasons. The first is to remind yourself that the problem is not simply with the objects of your awareness, it's with how you relate to them. The second is that if you come up with anything that seems constant, seems permanent, like a ground of being of some kind, or some deep interconnectedness, a oneness, non-duality, you have to ask yourself, are you still clinging to it? If you're clinging to it, if there's any sense of identity in there at all, there's going to be suffering, no matter how constant the object may seem. The fact that you're in a position where you're trying to feed on it, that's where the suffering lies. So having these frameworks properly sorted out helps get you past those kinds of wrong release, as the Buddha would call them. In other words, you think you're released, but you're not. You think you've reached something really permanent, but you haven't. So this is your protection. Also, of course, there's the whole question of how to interpret those three perceptions. The tendency to make them metaphysical truths, that is, characteristics of things as they are, especially if you get to the question of, is there a self? Is there no self? The Buddha calls those questions a thicket of views, a wilderness of views, a contortion of views, a writhing of views. In other words, you get entangled in the brush and the thorns off to the side of the path. If we had to spend all our days arguing as to whether there is or isn't a self, we'd never be able to practice. We wouldn't have the time. We wouldn't have the opportunity. But if we see not self simply as a perception, a label that you apply to things when you need to develop dispassion for them, then not self, instead of being a thicket, is actually a machete for cutting through the thicket. It develops dispassion. And when the dispassion has done its work, you can put the labels down. There was a controversy years back in Thailand as to whether Nibbana was self or not self. The issue got so politicized that it made its way into the newspapers and on TV. So someone asked Ajahn Mahabua whether Nibbana was self or not self, and he answered, Nibbana is Nibbana. In other words, you don't apply either of those perceptions to Nibbana. It's something beyond, but that's because it is total dispassion. There's no clinging there at all, so the clinging is suffering, not because we cling to impermanent things, but because just the act of clinging in and of itself entails suffering. Keep that in mind because that's what we're working on as we practice. You're going to cling to the meditation. That's fine for the time being. Remember Ajahn Chah's example. Coming back from the market, you've got a banana in your hand, and someone asks you, why are you carrying the banana? You say, I want to eat it. Are you going to eat the peel too? No. Then why are you carrying that? Ajahn Chah says, how are you going to answer them? As he said, you answer them out of desire, your desire to give the right answer. And that's what gives rise to the discernment that allows you to say, the time hasn't come to let go of the peel. If I let go of the peel now and held the banana flesh in my hand, it'd become mush. So you have some passion for your practice as you try, at the same time, to develop dispassion for things that would pull you away. You apply the 3 perceptions wherever you need to develop that sense of dispassion. When the path is fully developed, then you can foster dispassion for that too. Because that's what we're working on. The way the mind relates to things, trying to feed on them all the time out of a sense of passion for them. We're such compulsive feeders that even when we have our first experience of the deathless, we're going to try to feed on that too. We're like a little baby who crawls around and sees everything as stuff to put in his mouth. But when you find that there is something where there really is no clinging in it, there really is no sense of hunger, that's when you realize that the feeding was the problem all along. And that's when you can put everything down. So remember to keep the framework and the contents of the framework in the right order. The 3 perceptions are there just to help you within the framework of the duties of the 4 Noble Truths. The 4 Noble Truths come first because they alert you as to where the real problem is. If you keep your eyes on that, then it's hard to go wrong.